Okay.
According to the Smithsonian Art Institute's Art and Music Department, making music is a universal human trait that goes back at least 35,000 years. The Baroque period brought us composers like Bach and Vivaldi. The classical and Romantic periods introduced Beethoven and Chopin, while the post-Great War era was rich in culture with music like jazz by greats such as Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, blues by Nat King Cole and B.B. King, and speaking of the King, the blues-inspired rock and roll of Elvis Presley got everyone swooning over the rhythmical gyrations of his hips. While there have been extraordinary composers and songwriters throughout time, the height of all music came in the 1960s as a band known as the Beatles and their brilliant producer, George Martin, produced music that still to this day is unparalleled. A little more than a year ago, knowing my love of the Beatles, my wife took me to Las Vegas for my birthday to see the incredible show by Cirque du Soleil called Love at the Mirage. According to their website, the Beatles' Love pays tribute to the band's artistic achievements, using real and fictional characters to explore the themes of their songs, featuring several scenes inspired by the poetry of the song's lyrics, with 60 performers in aerial performances, extreme sports, and urban and freestyle dance. After experiencing a couple of the most mind-blowing and immersive artistry, I walked back onto the Vegas Strip, inspired and face covered in tears, and had a profound thought. The Beatles have the best musical catalog of any other artist in history. In order to understand how I can make such a bold statement, I want to share with you how the Beatles revolutionized the music industry through studio magic, imaginative lyrical storytelling, and beautiful compositions. The Beatles, a four-piece rock and roll band out of Liverpool, revolutionized not only the music industry, but an entire era as musicians, concept artists, and pop culture icons. Their songs have influenced generations of listeners and many aspiring musicians, me included, dreaming to one day record at Apple Records or at least produce something with the same magical ingredients as their idols, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. My young life was changed as the earthy smell of cardboard and dust filled my nose while I eased one of my dad's vinyl records out from between the hundreds of others within a 6.5-foot tall metal cabinet in the garage of my childhood home. I kicked the zip tie aside that had once held the cabinet door shut and sat on the concrete floor in front of the ominous shrine of music and melodies, both metal doors now wide open to reveal the treasure trove inside. Looking at the album I had in my hand, I marveled at the cover. The band's name was spelled out in flowers across the bottom, and above that, an assortment of influential people such as Bob Dylan, Fred Astaire, Edgar Allan Poe, and Marilyn Monroe stood around four lads dressed in ornate and tasseled costumes of yellow, pink, blue, and orange. According to NPR Music Podcast, Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band is acknowledged nearly universally as one of the most well-known and influential rock albums of all time. And the critic, Colin Fleming, argues that the artwork on the cover is just as important as the music. He says, it expanded the notion of what is possible, a notion of freedom. The death of the pop Beatles and a rebirth of this new, almost populist avant-garde Beatles. The cover, as much as the final famous chord of A Day in the Life, signifies the same kind of idea. Many artists of the time rushed to their studios to record new albums that were shaped by the Beatles, having inserted countercultural values into the mainstream. Records like Jefferson Airplanes, After Bathing at Baxter's, the Moody Blues, Days of Futures Past, and the Rolling Stones, Their Satanic Majesty's Request, all took influence from the experimental and psychedelic Sgt. Pepper's, which went on to be the greatest selling UK record to date. In keeping with their lyrics, you say you want a revolution. Well, the Beatles continued to evolve with each sequential album, and thus, so did the music industry. For Rolling Stone magazine's 100 Greatest Artists of All Time article, musician and songwriter Elvis Costello remembers it like this. The Beatles arrived sounding like nothing else. They made writing your own material expected rather than exceptional. They were the first group to mess with the aural perspective of their recordings and have it be more than just a gimmick, deliberately putting things out of balance for the listener. You can't exaggerate the license that this gave to everyone from Motown to Jimi Hendrix. But it wasn't just the sound of the music that was catching people's attention. The imaginative storytelling of the Beatles lyrics is what kept us singing their songs still 60 years after it hit the radio waves. There is a song in the Beatles musical catalog for every season and circumstance of our lives. When I was a child, I loved lighthearted songs like Obla Dee, Obla Da, Yellow Submarine, and of course, Octopus's Garden. Their fantastical imagery and descriptive stories would sweep me away in my mind's eye as I would envision each line playing out in my head. In the town where I was born lived a man who sailed the seas, and he told us of his life in the land of submarines. What an exciting concept for a child. As I got older, I can remember having high school crushes and driving in my car singing, "Don't Let Me Down." I'm in love for the first time. Don't you know it's gonna last? And inevitably, as I experienced the perils of unrequited love, I would find myself singing, "While my guitar gently weeps." In my young adulthood, as I was learning how to deal with adult responsibilities, I sang songs like "Taxman" and "Help, I Need Somebody." And when I had children of my own, I relished the opportunity each night to sing them to sleep with the goodnight song. Now it's time to say goodnight. Good night, sleep tight. And of course, now that most of them are into adulthood, I find myself singing them, "Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64? One of my proudest moments was taking a road trip with my wife and kids. As we listened to the Beatles, one album after another, I listened to my then teenage children sing along with every song and almost every lyric. So yes, I believe I've raised them right. One of the most important members of these musical masterpieces was the man who Sir Paul McCartney himself called the fifth Beatle, George Martin. When Paul had woken up with a melody in his head one morning, which would ultimately become the song Yesterday, Martin convinced McCartney to grab an acoustic guitar and sing the song by himself, a first in Beatles history. He also suggested that the Beatles use another first, a string quartet. This was the first of many elegant arrangements that the producer would create for their songs. Some of my favorite orchestrated classical music was composed and arranged by George Martin. Yellow Submarine had been taken from one of the Beatles albums and was expanded into a full-length animated film. Many songs from the Beatles catalog was used in the film, including a couple of originals, but it was what came on the backside of the album that I was enamored with. George Martin's score painted the scenes of Pepperland and Blue Meanies as much as any animator or colorist could have done for the film. These are the songs and melodies I still find myself whistling or humming on a regular basis. George Martin's impact on the Beatles and how we have heard them cannot go unmentioned. It was even he who produced the soundtrack for the Cirque du Soleil reimagined compilation that led to my epiphany in the first place. The Love soundtrack is as visionary as anything Lennon and McCartney ever wrote, as they had provided the clay for Martin to sculpt. In conclusion, it may seem like a frivolous proclamation to deem anyone the greatest in 35,000 years of music, but the songs of the Beatles are more valuable to me than most of the finest things in life. They have provided a love language between me and my father, and my children, my spouse, and maybe now even built a connection between me and you. For decades, universally, the music of the Beatles has helped us all come together right now over some of the best moments of our lives.